seal that is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she builds planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our very special show, The Three C's: Connection, Communication, and COVID-19. I'm James Monroe. I'm the producer of adult programs at the Museum of Science Boston, and I'm so excited to introduce tonight's very special program. This is a collaboration with one of my favorite artists and producers in Boston, New Queer Power, and they've put together a multidisciplinary evening of interviews, performances, and so much more from voices from communities all across the country who are going to share insights into communication, connection during a world that is being plagued by COVID-19. And tonight is the first show, an event of our current winter-spring 2021 subspace season of adult programming. We're so excited to kick things off tonight with New Queer Power and the Three C's, but we have so much more still to come every single week now through the end of May, a different event each week, all free, all virtual. So I encourage you to go to mos.org/adults and check out our full lineup. You can register for all of those events right now and come back and spend your winter and spring with us virtually here at the Museum of Science. Now, I will be back a little bit later on for a Q&A with New Queer Power. So at any point tonight, as you have questions, you can enter those by going to slido.com, slido.com, and use the code the3Cs, just as it appears on your screen right now. And we will try and get through as many of those as we can a little bit later on. I need to thank our friends Barbara and Malcolm L. Sherman for supporting the adult programming here at the museum. Without them, this show would not be happening. It would not be free, and we just would not be here. So please join me in giving a huge round of applause to Barbara and Malcolm L. Sherman. And finally, at the end of the show, I ask all of you to go to donate.mos.org/MOS at home and consider making a gift to allow us to keep bringing virtual programming just like tonight into all of your homes. Once again, that's donate.mos.org/MOS at home. But now it's my honor and pleasure to turn it over to tonight's show. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the Three C's.
Oh, hi there. Oh, I should be. Hi. For those of you who do not know me, I am New Queer Power. Hello. Hi. And tonight we're here for something that is incredibly daunting. Something that is kind of impossible. And that's trying to look back on the last year that we've had. But it's also more than just the last year we have had. It's the time that has brought us to here. This evening is also impossible because we're going to be meeting many people, and we're going to be talking through around 4 hours of conversation, of story, of personal experience. And we're putting it all in this one space that you are here with me together. All right. So let's do something impossible. But first, I should probably say something about the 3 C's. Like, what are the 3 C's? Well, the 3 C's are connection, communication, and COVID-19. Now, I'd love to start this evening in a similar way to how I started the conversations that have happened, that will be happening. And that is to ask you some questions. And don't feel like you have to answer me, just think about it. So the question is, connection. What is connection? What else is connection other than, say, your connections online, your social connections, your connection to your family, your connection to your culture? What else is connection? Similarly, what else is communication? Communication is how we as humans interact. It's how we convey ideas to each other, whether that is, oral, verbal, written, visual, all of the different options. There's so many ways that we as humans have found to communicate with one another. And then there's also how you communicate a virus. And that this virus that has absolutely altered at a drastic fundamental level how we interact with each other is spread largely through communication, a form of communication. So then that brings us to the third C. And gotta say, it's not my favorite C. And that would be COVID-19. So similarly to communication and connection, what else is COVID-19? What else has it been in our experience? And also, what else can we make it? So that gives you the general sort of background. So the general concept of all the places that we'll go. Let's get my tune started. All right. Now, as your captain for the evening, I will be doing a bit of cueing to try and give a little bit of a heads up of the territory that we'll be navigating into. Now, this is for me, this is for you, this is so we all have an idea of exactly where this is heading. And so I will be doing time checks. To give you a general idea, our flow is going to be going first into an area that touches on immigration and xenophobia. And then we'll be looking at environmental issues, global warming. Next, we'll be touching on racism and police brutality. And then we'll be hitting racism and working class exploitation. So that's my little cue to you, key to you, in case it's something that you will get something out of, the same as I do. Well, it's so hard to get started. But I guess what I can say is we're going to be silly because humans are silly. We're going to be honest because to talk about what we're talking about, we have to be honest. We are going to be careful because we are talking about very real things. We're going to be sad because mourning is misplaced love trying to find someplace to be. We're going to be angry because angry is a sign of our boundaries. And we're going to have boundaries because we do not exist in a vacuum. We are going to disagree at times. But that's fine because a variety of viewpoints doesn't detract from the truth that we all share. Now, the question that I have for you really is, are you as tired as I am of living through so many major historical events? Like, really, trying to keep up every single day is exhausting. Like, I don't even know how to process the amount of information that has happened just in the last, 2 weeks. You too? Yeah, I don't know. But really, how do you keep up with it all? I don't know. How do you keep up with it all?
I think because I'm an immigrant, because I've gone to college in the Midwest, I went to 2 different schools. So change is kind of constant for me, and the sets of rules governing my existence shift very quickly, and I've had to adapt very quickly at different points in my life. So I saw this as another challenge in the series of things that happened in my life. My name is Emmy Great. It is my stage name. I am originally from Mandalay, Burma. I now reside in Brooklyn, New York. I am best known as a drag queen, but I consider myself a multimedia queer artist. I hold a couple of titles in town. I also produce some shows. One of which is a Plastic Pen Asian Drag Review, which is now 3 years old. I did some of it on Twitch online during the pandemic, and I was able to work with queer Asian artists from all around the world.
I'd love to hear more about your experience of jumping through the hoops to get your citizenship during this year, this incredibly tense, xenophobic year.
For clarification, I don't have citizenship yet. I am only halfway to citizenship, and it's already been 8 years. I got granted asylum, which means I cannot be deported. I'm free to live in this country, work in this country, travel in this country. Previously, my attorney suggested against even flying because I cannot be detained technically, but ICE might try to detain, so it's a waste of time and money for both of us, so don't fly. So in terms of working and seeing people, the places I could go to were, I'm based in New York, so I've been to Philly, Boston, Middle Massachusetts, Connecticut, Long Island. So I've been like stuck in this corner of the country, and I've like been wanting to travel, and I finally got the paperwork that says you can live in this country, work anywhere, travel anywhere. And it's like, no, I can't.
Oh, yes. Oh, perfect. Congratulations, you have these things. You actually can't go anywhere, and also all the bars are closed.
My existence in this country has kind of been very precarious since the 2016 election, because like I was in a position where I can't go back to my own country due to homophobia and transphobia, but also in a country that is growing in terms of xenophobia, racism, and anti-immigrant sentiments. So I knew that it was going to be hard. But even though I am not able to travel physically, some of the barriers in working with people from different places have been taken down. So physical barriers, yes. Financial barriers, or
Yeah. I got
in terms of like collaborating with someone on a different caliber, not really anymore.
What was it like working on producing the A+ drag show in a global format where you're working with artists from all around the world?
Personally, stressful. Because I am coordinating with 20 plus people who are going through this pandemic under different governments in different localities with different internets. Artistically, it's very fulfilling. So I started A+. One of the core principles was to spike the idea that all Asian people look alike, all Asian drag queens look alike. And to be honest, we kind of do in drag because we have to paint to a specific standard of white feminine beauty. But people have been breaking out of that for a while now, so that's less of an issue. The shows in New York, when we started and as we evolved, were very much about being Asian. I never tell the people I book to bring X, Y, or Z. So in the context of American culture, our show and our material is very much about being Asian, being immigrant, about family, and even within that, there are two major narratives. For me, someone who migrated personally, and for people like me who also migrated themselves, they have a lot of attachment to where they come from, and feel out of place in American culture, but there's also a stubborn part of us that don't want to integrate. And for Asian American kids whose parents or grandparents migrated and they grew up here, they feel a strange disconnect from their parents and want to integrate with American culture very badly. And they want to be accepted, celebrated, and loved. So those are like the two rivaling narratives. The stubbornness of not wanting to integrate and having nostalgia of where we come from. The technical term I think is, what is it called? Racial nostalgia or racial melancholia? I don't know exactly, but once the show opened up to queer Asian people all around the world, especially people who are living in their native culture, there isn't that element of I am Asian anymore, but there is a stronger sense of I am queer. But how do I contextualize it within my own culture? But also, how can I be empowered and liberated through Western culture, which can very often be an oppressive colonial force. So that's how the narratives shifted once the show went online and international. I was the golden child growing up and everything just turned upside down after I came out. My parents, they were working for a while. They're both doctors and run a small private clinic together. And they closed down because they didn't get enough PPE or government support. And they have been using up their retirement funds. But also the good thing is that they're finally getting some rest. My mother has post-polio scoliosis. She contracted polio at the age of 18 months, and her right leg is atrophied, and she has to depend a lot on her left leg to walk. She is now wheelchair bound. I've actually taken the time to talk to my parents. Previously they would message me, be like, hey, what are you up to? I was like, it's past midnight and you know I'm still up, but I don't want to have to explain to you what I'm doing. One way I've really bonded with my mother is through cooking. She cooked everything growing up, and I never learned how to cook. And when I came to this country and I started visiting friends, I wanted to make food from home, and I would ask her for good stuff. She told me the basics of Burmese cooking, and she just said, okay, this is how you make things. Adjust the ingredients as needed.
And this has mainly been over the course of the last year?
Yes.
That this line of communication has opened up?
Because they're not working so much anymore, they've actually had the time to watch my shows. Even though things have been hard this year, I'm glad it's happening at this particular point in my life. Because even though I may hate X, Y, and Z things about the world, I at least don't hate myself. I've gotten to a point where I can look at myself, reflect on things, change things, work on things, and don't beat myself up over it. And at this point, it's also I've made so many connections. Once we open up, I'm going to travel. That's the optimism that I'm really with. Also, I kind of want to keep doing things online.
Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now it seems as if they're here to stay. I believe in yesterday.
So that was The Nest by Emmy Great, an original composition. And I brought us back here with a little bit of guitar accompaniment because, well, I felt a bit inspired by Emmy. You see, that was actually the first song that I learned on guitar. Get the groove back going. It was the first song that I learned on guitar actually at the beginning of 2020. I've played instruments my entire life, well, since I was 6. But guitar, never. I got given a red electric guitar at my 6th birthday. Never played guitar. Never happened. Sorry, Auntie Teddy. Until now. And there's something about Yesterday as a song, you know? It touches on this relationship to the past and really looking at the past and having the question of, was this good? Or was this actually not so great? One of the things that it reminds me of, so I grew up on a small island in Washington State called Vashon Island. And Vashon Island is a beautiful, beautiful island covered in trees and lush life. And every summer there is the Strawberry Festival. And the Strawberry Festival, all of my memories are joyous and happy and, you know, getting to be in a parade, getting to go on the Ferris wheel, you know, classic summer festival kind of things. The Strawberry Festival started because back when it started, Vashon was known for strawberries. Strawberry fields forever. It was all about huge, fabulous strawberries that won awards, you know, the entire works that would create something like a Strawberry Festival. But here's the thing. The history of the Strawberry Festival gets a little bit murky because you see, the majority of the farmers that were creating this bountiful, beautiful crop were Asian immigrants, specifically Japanese immigrants. And around the time of World War II, internment camps popped up. And people were manifest destinied off of their homes, off of their land and their business, and it was absorbed by white farmers. And you know what? As someone who grew up on Strawberry Island, Vashon Island, it's, you know, it's not really known for strawberries anymore. We still celebrate. But when you're just there in the festival vibe, you don't really catch on to the much murkier and much darker history that lies underneath. That's kind of what I think about when I hear Yesterday. You know, the lines are, why did she have to go? I don't know, she wouldn't say. Really, dude? Did she really not say? Let me just say that most of the time I feel like in those kind of situations, she's probably said a lot. But I digress. It pulls on that question of what is our history and what do we remember of our history specifically? Because sure, we know about the history of World War II. It's something that's been studied a whole bunch. And we know the history of Japanese internment camps. And yeah, that's something that we all at least perfunctorily learn in history class, one hopes, as long as you aren't too close to Texas. But then recognizing where that came up, where that impacted the history that we live in. Because history isn't something that just exists as an abstract off in the past. It's something that forces us to live our lives both in the past, the present, and the future. The one part of that, you know, we have a lot more concrete ability to alter and impact. So it's, you know, makes you think. For our time check, it's getting close to when we're going to be talking about some environmental not great things happening, some environmental impacts that we are part of now, that have been part of our history, and that we are warily looking off into the future to see what is going to happen next. We've forgotten so much collectively, is really what this boils down to. So much of human history, so many of the stories that we experience, that we live through. When I say story, I mean what our lives are and what they have shaped up to be, get forgotten by the controlling powers that be. With so much that we've collectively forgotten, how will we remember everything that happened in the last year? Like I can barely remember what happened 6 months ago. You try and tell me when a particular meme popped up and I thought it was 10 years ago. That was at the beginning of the year? No. Since history repeats itself, can we learn from our past?
If that time is not now, when will people, put their efforts into that? When will people shift their focus? It has me a little nervous. I am Christina Cole. Currently, I'm head of documentation at Open Source Medical Supplies. Prior to this, I come from the medical legal background sector and also healthcare documentation.
Open source medical supplies really didn't exist before 2020. It really came together. So could you give a sort of story of how that progression happened?
It started as a Facebook group, of all things.
Of all things.
Initially, it was a small but fast-growing community where people were kind of reporting what we weren't hearing in the media about shortages or things being cut off, supplies being cut off. And it was people from all over the world. And it was both the healthcare side of things, particularly nurses or clinicians, that were coming and saying, we're out of face masks. And more posts like these popped up. And then people were saying, start having conversations. What does it take to make a ventilator? What does it take to make a face shield? Or even something like a mask, which seems pretty simple. And it just took off from there. So very quickly, it reached, I'm not sure when the group reached at one point 73,000 members, but it was early on. It was pretty amazing. How many, we had, engineers, we had nurses, we had epidemiologists, we had web developers, but all working on this core document that we still have, and also became the foundation for everything we've done and continue to do after that. So it was wild. It was really wild.
Could you talk a little bit more about the environment that led to this critical need?
Yeah, we had challenges right from the start because back in March, there was not anywhere near the amount of information that we have now about COVID. Not that we necessarily have a lot of information right now about the actual virus itself, but less so then. We had to rely a lot on interviews from frontline workers in terms of what treatments were being used, what the course of illness looked like. There were very early journal articles that were coming out of China from the very earliest accounts of handling these patients. So that's all we had. And without the community that we had behind us, it would not have been possible. And sure enough, in the earlier days of it, when the respiratory infections started hiking up here in the US, doctors weren't getting enough PPE. And there were several factors behind that. A very large supplier of PPE up until COVID was coming out of China. China had to deal with its own surge in illnesses, so they had to first and foremost try to meet their supply needs. Because of the spread of COVID, a lot of borders were shut down, a lot of land and seaports were closed down, and some countries, including China, banned exports so that they could meet their own demands. A lot of people will remember the FEMA stockpile, where hospitals suddenly weren't getting their orders and they had been confiscated for this national redistribution that was kind of swept under the rug and not really talked about all that much. So, yeah.
Yeah, that just like disappeared.
A huge weakness in our global supply chain, but especially here too, because a lot of manufacturing of many goods does not happen here. It happens overseas. And that was pretty early on something we realized at OSMS as we saw makers responding to these requests from healthcare workers saying like, well, I have a 3D printer. I think I can make a face shield, and the NIH has their 3D print exchange library. So we started realizing that these kind of things don't have to come from so far away or be so vulnerable to disruption.
You look back historically, and before we had all of our manufacturing outsourced overseas,
Yep.
this kind of community response to crises was actually pretty normal.
Well, certainly a lot of people do compare kind of the maker response efforts to kind of retool. A lot of times you'll hear that, it's a wartime response. Very, very similar. Even down to people having their pandemic gardens. I mean, people had victory gardens back then. I remember thinking, it's really, people are really having a hard time with mask mandates or social distancing. One thing I came across, and I cannot remember if it was, an article or a media outlet or something that was actually in a journal, was how resistant the public was back in 1918 to their pandemic. The government had said, don't go out and sing, don't gather in the streets, and people didn't do it then either. So history really does repeat itself, because there are these accounts written accounts of this very similar response to like, don't tell me what to do. Yeah, so this is not the first time. I remember reading that and just thinking like, oh man, okay, here we go again. History does repeat itself. And it's like, it's true. There is an element of truth to that statement. The reaction to COVID has me a little bit concerned because of some things that are going on behind the scenes in terms of how did this pandemic happen? And there's a lot of talk and some points of research that would point to, as we continue to experience this worsening of climate change, we are going to have more pandemics. And they're not going to be 100 years apart. Like, this could be a new era of pandemics, just because of the way Earth systems are shifting. And what has me worried is that if we can't get people to take a global pandemic seriously, how are we going to get them to take other issues seriously, including climate change, which is an issue that contributes to this? Healthcare inequality too. That also, all of a sudden you have millions of people around the globe that got sick or are sick, and many of them will have lingering complications from this in healthcare systems that are not equipped to deal with them. So if the time to really address these things with the full attention they deserve, if that time is not now, when?
Wouldn't that be nice?
So the Dust Bowl, we all learn about it in school. We all, some of us have relatives that remember it, read books about it. We've all seen retouched photographs of it. That happened because of tillage. And here we are, and we still have tillage. And if not now, when? It's like none of these things are new. And many of these circumstances we've found ourselves in before. Like, how do we get everyone kind of on the same page, at least more, so we can start addressing a lot of these very serious and pressing issues that are a threat to the globe, all of us, every single human and other creature on this earth. We think about COVID and the immediate thing that comes to mind is like a lot of people got sick, we didn't have enough supplies. So certainly COVID more immediately uncovered the supply chain problem. Well, then it started to uncover the healthcare system problem. And then we start to see the numbers of who was affected more or had less access to care. And then we're seeing inequality in race and in class, social class, working classes. So, and then politics. So I think COVID has just kind of uncovered just this sweeping hand that has just uncovered all of these interruptions or faults. And it's just, every day is kind of like a bad 90s infomercial, but wait, there's more, because it's so it's so true that COVID has been very revealing, and it could be at a small level like, oh, I have a family member that thinks it's a hoax and won't wear a mask, or it could be our leadership told people that we should be injecting Clorox. Like, it's a whole array of problems that have been exposed. So COVID has exposed not just our problems, but in a way us and how we relate to each other and the world around us.
Well, shit. Roll credits, I guess. There's the answer. No. We have a lot more to go. Much traveling to go. But isn't that wild to think that a lot of the things that are absolutely driving us crazy, or things that are major threats to our ability to survive as a human race, shall we say, none of it is new. Like, if you'd told me that anti-maskers existed 100 years ago and that we were dealing with people insisting that their personal liberties were connected to a cloth covering that's used for a medical purpose, or, heaven forbid, politicizing a medical device, it blows my mind. We really do just cycle over and over again. And so the question becomes, how do we actually learn from the past if we keep just insisting on repeating it? I honestly have no answer. These kind of questions don't usually have really clear answers, except for listen to scientists and value human life over dollars. But, the obvious ones. But I'm working on making myself a mask right now. I have made all of the masks for myself and my partner, using some really great designs from makermask.com. It's this really awesome way of making use of shopping bag material. It's this polypropylene woven plastic material that's actually incredibly similar. It's the same material as is used inside of medical masks, the disposable kind. The thing is medical masks and the medical kind of woven plastic, that is held to help these kind of situations where blockages come up. This is a material you can only find in medical areas. And then there is the consumer version, which is found in a lot of reusable shopping bags. Have you heard recently that we're supposed to start double masking? Oh, just absolutely wild. Well, at least we are a year into this. It's time for me and mine to have some new masks, get some new fashion going. Well, one thing that I do want to mention with that idea of repeating timelines is I feel like it's really easy for certain factions of people to be able to forget, because that's a big part of the forgetting conversation that we've kind of glossed over until now. But the thing is that you are either allowed to forget because your environment supports you not having to deal with those difficulties, or you keep working. And that's a lot of what we have these days. And historically, we have people who have been working really hard for so long to support themselves, to support their communities, to show up for each other, because they have to, because no one else is going to. Going back to the Strawberry Festival, I, as a little white child, was absolutely able to just go into the bliss of Strawberry Festival without engaging with its history. That isn't going to be the case for everyone. So really, we have to touch on privilege when we touch on forgetting history and remembering history. A time check is letting me know that we're about to move on to some discussion as well as some visual examples of protest, of police violence. And so this is the time check to let you know that this is what we're about to be heading into. So as we go along, either remembering or forgetting, one thing is absolutely for certain. We didn't end up here like ruby slippers a la Dorothy. Like, we didn't just, like, we're here now. That's not how it works. We made our way here. But how?
It sort of evolved organically. I am the Luminous Pariah. I'm a cabaret performer based out of Seattle, Washington, in the United States. I lean towards social justice as well as having a love for plants, graphic design, and connecting with my lovely community. As a performance artist, I am an entertainer, but I'm also an artist. And that's kind of been an interesting line to walk, because I've definitely created burlesque acts that are just fun and they make people smile and giggle, and that's great. It's a great gift to give people, the gift of laughter and lightheartedness, and you get to take a deep breath. But then, there's always things that are near and dear to my heart that I feel like are important to talk about, that I also want to put on stage for people to converse about and think about. And that's what I feel like my duty is to not shy away from that and not just always do the fun, safe stuff that makes people laugh and really like me, but to do things that people don't like, and to do things that might cause people not to like me, and to risk that, if you will. And that's what I feel my responsibility as an artist is. And then to have my experiences with the protesting this May and June, all throughout June, and to see how the presidential election unfolded this November, to be out there, to go down to this square to stand up against police brutality, and then to be tear gassed, and the pepper sprays in the air, the gas is wafting up the street, and we're just running. There's thousands of people running in every which direction because we didn't know where to go. Some friends of mine who were a block forward were kettled. They were surrounded by the police, maced and arrested. As things progressed this summer, we had a mayor here in Seattle who said, okay, we're not going to use any more tear gas and any more pepper spray. And then about 3 days later, there was more tear gas and more pepper spray. So, being lied to about your safety, I think it's really fascinating. At least 3 people were killed during these protests just in Seattle alone this springtime. Our initial protests were closer downtown in the financial district, and pretty quickly within the third day of those, it was moved up to Capitol Hill, which is a more residential neighborhood and nightlife neighborhood where I live, outside of the main police station in Seattle, called the East Precinct. The police have been established in the city of Seattle since the 1890s, I believe, and they know how crowds work, they know how protests work, and so they know exactly how really frustrated, pent-up people feel, and how they're going to behave when they're aggressed. So the very beginning of those protests, the police formed a line with their bodies in full riot gear, and that allowed protesters to come right up against them. So of course it was very volatile. The last night that I was closer than I wanted to be was, they call it the pink umbrella moment. The New York Times did a really excellent article with a bunch of an amalgam of all these photos and videos and diagrams to show exactly what happened. Basically, you had a huge crowd of people pushing right up against this barrier, and the police were right on the other side, far too close. And people had umbrellas to shield themselves from pepper spray, naturally. And one person had this pink umbrella just a little bit too far over the barrier, and a policeman decided, oh, it's too close to me, so he snatched it out of the person's hands and pepper sprayed them in the face, and that was it. That was the trigger for the whole crowd to just erupt into mayhem. There was more pepper spray all down the line, and tear gas was being launched into the crowd, and then the flashbangs, which to me are super terrifying because they're dangerous. They don't just make sound. A week and a half after that, a police officer had thrown a flashbang up into the air, and it hit a girl in the chest and exploded and stopped her heart. The medics dragged her over onto the table of this fast food restaurant outdoor court and, was performing CPR, and she flatlined. She actually died, I believe, 2 or 3 times, and she was resuscitated each time, and she's fine. She's fine now, but, emotionally scarred and physically scarred for life.
It is incredibly misleading and false to think that those protests had anything to do with violence except for the acts of police violence and brutality that were caught on film over and over again.
What was really fascinating was to see how things escalated, why they would escalate, and exactly what would happen. And like you were saying, it was 90% of the time the police officers instigating things. And what was really fascinating to me was to see each time we were aggressed as a people as a whole, that crowd would multiply. So it became full of people who were not just there protesting violence against BIPOC, but people who were mad that they were getting tear gassed in their apartments. People's pets were throwing up. Someone had an infant that had lung issues because tear gas was wafting into their apartment. So this crowd was full of people who were out for civil rights, but there were also people that were just mad at the police as well. So it was hard because when you look at folks who are at home watching very selective live stream videos or forbid, certain news outlets, you have very, very partial truths or sometimes complete untruths. Like Fox News sent a crew out to film in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone one night, and I'm only laughing because of how ridiculous. You can look these photos up. It's actually kind of funny to see how bad it is. It's like a cut and paste job over all these different. They even took a burning police car in Minneapolis and had the headline like "Seattle is in utter chaos" and da 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 da. And yes, it was scary, and yes, it was chaotic, but a lot of it was very was amplified and selected to be portrayed in a certain light to make these protests look like they were a bunch of very aggressive people who just wanted to burn down police stations and stuff. Really, what I saw was our people who were out there defending Black lives and standing up for social justice were defending the police station. Seeing it first person unfold and how fast things can happen. Some really scary things have happened. Someone drove a car into a protest and got out with a gun, shot somebody in the arm, and then turns himself into the police, and he was the brother of one of the policemen, so he wasn't tackled, he wasn't anything. He just walked very calmly up to them and turned himself in. So it's, I don't know. Mostly what they used in Seattle was CS gas dust, so it's not actually a gas, but it's a tiny particle that floats in the air that comes out of these canisters. They say it should only affect your lungs for 45 minutes after exposure, but my first time being tear gassed, I felt it in my lungs for 3 days, and I wasn't even right in the front of it getting all of the gas that everyone else was getting. Folks were reporting late periods all summer long because they were out there breathing in tear gas on an almost daily basis. So that was really fascinating to kind of dive into. There's a really great publication about military-grade crowd control weapons and where they've been used historically, their specs, and what you can do to mitigate some of the impact, as well as some of the military formations that police will make, and the communication, the visual communication that can that can sort of tell you as a protester what's about to happen. And the more I was out there, the more I had read up on those things and sort of looked at that, the more clear it became to me that this was kind of warfare with the people.
That sounds abusive.
And I think there's a reason, the Geneva Convention outlawed CS gas dust because it turns out that that specific tear gas does cause damage to some people. So it's always kind of the government, right, who's like, oh, actually, whoops, that does cause damage, but let's just, keep it on the DL. So I felt like my place was to be out there helping flush eyes, get supplies, medical supplies distributed, make sure everybody's okay. And it was an interesting way to spend my springtime. And as someone who is a fairly anxious person, it definitely was intense. But I'm glad I was out there doing something I couldn't bear to just be, sitting at home, wringing my hands, listening to the grenades go off, wondering if my friends were safe, right? So.
Yeah.
You can only be so caring and so empathetic to a point, until you realize that, oh, these people over here aren't caring. They aren't empathetic. In fact, they're vocalizing the fact that they think that I and my community should not exist. And that's been really a lot to think about and to learn about and to be parts of those conversations on the internet and have those words said to me. And so I'm excited for things to calm down a little bit as the pandemic lightens up and people's daily lives become less intense. But I will never forget the way that we've treated each other in 2020. I think we've all learned a lot about one another this year.
Now we are ready to head for the horn. Way, roll and go. Our boots and our clothes, boys, are all in the pond to be rollicking randy dandy-o. Heave Apollo, heave away. Way, roll and go. The anchor's on board and the cable's all stored to be rollicking randy dandy-o. Man the stow's capstan and heave with a will. Way, roll and go. Soon we'll be driving her way down the hill to be rollicking randy dandy-o. Heave Apollo, heave away. Way, roll and go. The anchor's on board and the cable's all stored to be rollicking randy dandy-o. Heave Apollo, heave away. Way, roll and go. The anchor's on board and the cable's all stored to be rollicking randy dandy-o.
I don't know about you, but sometimes singing can help me recenter. Man, sea shanties have been really popular recently, haven't they? It's been kind of like a funny thing to watch become popular in this like flash pan. And it kind of reminds me of how in the beginning of quarantine, the video games that people were really, really obsessed with playing was Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing was everywhere, and it was what everyone wanted to do. And then later on in the year, a different game became popular, Among Us. And I think those two games say a lot about our collective psyche, because stay with me here. Just stay with me here. Because Animal Crossing is all about having a community and a home and living a life in community, interacting with others, being able to have a society. And Among Us, which, later half of the year, shall we say, getting closer and closer to, let's say November, Among Us is a game all about finding the alien that's killing everybody and tossing out of the think that says a lot about our psyche. And I also think that the popularity of sea shanties right now says a lot about our psyche as well. But there's even something more that, like, there's more about sea shanties that I find really, really, really interesting. Did you know that it is argued that sea shanties are a technology? You heard me right. They are not just a song that is sung amongst sailors to while away the long days and hours at sea. No, it is songs, especially sea shanties, that have connection to the word chant, so sea chanting. So there are many kinds of sea shanties, actually. The one that's really popular on TikTok right now is the Wellerman comes, bringing sugar, tea, and rum, that nonsense. That's actually not, it's a sea shanty genre, but there are many kinds of sea shanties. And as far as like chanting goes, Wellerman is more of like what they would sing after hours. And it has a lot more references to, say, the inequality that is on a ship. Waiting to be brought their tea, rum, and sugar. Well, they weren't getting paid. That was actually how they got paid. So there's a lot of darkness inside of the Wellerman comes. But sea shanties became popular between the 16th and 19th century, just like historical context-wise. And they became popular not just because they had fun, tongue-in-cheek ways that you could, poke a jab at your uppers. The randy dandies, that would be the people on board who had to wear suits, whereas the rest of everyone else, they, didn't wear nice outfits. So those were the randy dandies. And you want to know why they're rollicking? Well, rhyme was really popular in slang at the time. And so rollicking is really, really, really close to bollocksing. And bollocksing here in the US we're not very familiar with, but if you're thinking about your standard F word, 4 letters, you got it, bollocksing. So it became popular between the 16th to 19th century because it was a way to unify. Think of these big ships at the time that are doing all of the transporting of various goods. Big ships that have dangerous activities that have to be done in unison together and that you also need to know is happening. What's a great way to keep everyone on beat? What's a great way to ensure that everyone is moving in time together? And so yes, you can find people who think that the idea of sea shanties as a technology is, a bit too, the arts can't do that. Like, that's not. Well, then answer me this. Why was it then that the reason that the time period that sea shanties fell out of fashion was the 19th century with the invention of the steam engine and onboard motorized means of getting this work done. So if it had nothing to do with productivity, if it had nothing to do with keeping a team unified and hauling and heaving on specific words together, then why did it fall out of popularity at the time that a new technology came in place and replaced that labor? But here, we're gonna go even one step further because just go with it. Just go with it. This is how I am. I look at a topic and all of a sudden it just spirals out and it's a lot. There's another important part about the 16th to the 19th century, and specifically what was on the high seas. Now, we're going back to thinking about history again. Some of you probably know where I'm going already. That was the time period that we had a very, very dark time period of humans being forcibly traveled across the oceans, this very dark time that we refer to as the transatlantic slave trade. Now, other musicians and people have written up things about how you can very clearly see that there's a connection between sea shanties and blues. And a thing that's really, really well understood if you've looked at music in a historical context is that the blues would not, I mean, this is stating it really, really like overstating it, but the blues would not exist without Black culture. It would not. And so I am also saying that sea shanties would not exist if it weren't for Black culture. And you know, the longer that I interact with music and the longer that I interact with history, the more that I think that really you can't find a style of music that has not been touched and influenced and, you know, in many cases, started by Black culture. And I say started by with sea shanties because chanting was common on board ships. Chanting was a thing that they would do to convey, but specifically doing it as a musical song, that was unique. Isn't that just like absolutely fascinating? I think it's hilarious that you can look at like something that I have definitely heard people being like, oh, sea shanties, that is like the whitest music, that's up there with like hoedowns. And guess what? Hoedowns also aren't white because cowboys aren't white. Like, the more you look at history, the more that you see this like white clown makeup that's just been slapped on everything going like, yep, oh no, you don't have to, don't worry about that. That's, you know, we're just putting some white makeup over there. It's like, sure. Well, we are going to keep moving along. This is another time check moment that is going to let you know that we're going to continue looking at some topics that relate to racial injustice, racism, and that we're also going to be looking at the treatment of the working class. You know, just some nice comedic fare. But, you know, why talk about this now? Why start singing a sea shanty? Why look at the communication styles and patterns that are in protests? Why? Because it is communication and it is connection. It's there. So, how we communicate with each other, whether that's interpersonally or how a government communicates with the people who are governed by that government, or how the people are communicating with that government, what avenues are available, what is considered acceptable or unacceptable. It's all part of what we are dealing with. How we communicate, how our governments communicate with us, it matters, and we need to, we've got to.
We need each other now more than ever, no matter what.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Kaisha Davenport. I am based in Boston, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I like to joke that my pronouns are she, her, your, because you always got to bring home wherever you are. So about 3 years ago, I joined a catering cooperative called Olio Culinary Collective. And in 2019, together we opened a cooperatively owned restaurant called Tanam in Somerville, Massachusetts, where I'm currently sitting right now. And it's been a wild ride. Our terrible twos have been just a little bit defined by COVID. When we're not in pandemic brain, pandemic energy, I have the pleasure of running a small platform called Bar Noir Boston that connects Black and Brown hospitality professionals when we're not making drinks. I am forming a fledgling band with my good friends. Yeah, that's pretty much me. When we closed in March, it was like in the pocket, constantly booked. People are finally getting it. People have stopped questioning. People have predominantly white food media has finally given us some platform, and our physical space is probably the size of half a studio apartment. So we're always in just physical closeness to each other, and our dining experience, the experience of Tanam, is built around intimacy and physical connection and sharing space. We took the opportunity to stay closed and try to heal a little bit. 3 women of color opening a fine dining restaurant in Boston comes with a unique set of challenges. And that first year, as beautiful and as exhilarating as it was very stressful.
Yeah.
On top of just operating a business, still existing, moving throughout the world as, for me as a Black woman, for my co-owners as a woman of color, it already has a set of stress with it. Stress, trauma, struggles, whatever you'd like to call it. We reopened in September for outdoor dining and some takeout options. And I don't know what it would have been like had I just continued to work. The summer last year was so intense. And I don't know why. I felt it a lot more intensely than I have in past waves of racial injustice, unrest. Coming back to work, trying to figure out how to constantly pivot, constantly source funding for pivots, maintain balanced emotions around these pivots. This is probably actually the first time I'm really, really reflecting on it. We packed so much into those last 4 months, September into December. It was so physically demanding, and I haven't felt that burned out in a while. It just required everything we had to say, this is probably, could this be the last chance to really save the business? To be completely honest, I've been bartending since I was a teenager, and a sticking point is you don't talk about politics at the bar. This is about having a space that's for a good time and a good time only. So, fast forward, and now everyone wants to listen now. Everybody wants to pay attention. Everybody wants to hear your opinion, which was, I guess I'll say bittersweet. We saw it over the summer. Everyone's like, now we're going to focus more on societal issues in food and cultural issues in hospitality. And now we're going to find, X, Y, and Z person of color to speak on it. There have been many times where people have come into Tanam and really made it uncomfortable for us to be here, where people have asked the obvious questions of like, I want to speak to the manager. I want to speak to the owner. And I'm like, hey. and all those things we've just sat on out of the fear of, how does this affect our business? And then out of nowhere, it seems like out of nowhere, it's just, can I curse? No. I was going to say. You can absolutely. Because it's so fucked up. Because now it's like, now I want to hear you. But if you don't talk right now, I will silence you forever. That was your one opportunity. It challenged me and my level of groundedness around my own humanity. Could I go back to work and process like this 24/7? Like, in a cynical way, I'm required to provide or perform for you so that you can go back to comfortably making me hyper invisible.
I imagine as a small business owner, watching how funds got distributed to different businesses to support and also to send money to corporations that totally need to be making $1 billion during a pandemic while everyone is laid off. I imagine that must have been a frustrating experience.
Yes. Oh, yes. Funding has always been a challenge for Tanam. Getting Tanam off the ground required an incredible amount of proving ourselves worthy. When PPP funding was released, when EIDL funding was released, and just all of those things that we dealt with in the early stages came to resurface. What's our relationship to a bank? Like, to get access to a bank that will back us getting these loans. the different ways we had to finagle to figure out like how will we qualify, and then just seeing, you know, I don't know, Danny Meyer, freaking 11 Madison Park, be coddled as a small business. We've applied for all of the grants, the women's grants, the women's of color grants, the Massachusetts local grants, you name it. And we've gotten rejected so many times. Any way you could flip it, it's been really frustrating. The conversation around, can small businesses survive? What purpose do small businesses have in our communities, in the economy? And watching it be played out on this large scale, watching the conversation kind of happen without you, watching more privileged folks take up that space and fill it up with sound bites. And it's like, you don't speak for the rest of us.
Which then creates a bouncing off point for judgment.
Exactly. You'd be surprised how many people call and they say, are you guys taking reservations for indoor dining? Our restaurant's 381 square feet. So we're like, no, we're definitely not. And they're incredulous. Oh, you're not open? I'm like, what is it? What? But it is exactly that. It's that the handful of folks with that access are dragging the rest of us along and have informed everyone what feels safe and what is not as safe. And so now you just inflict another cycle of harm onto us, because now this person's like, Tanama's not open. But even these conversations in the issues around indoor dining versus outdoor dining, and how a handful of people have managed to co-opt that for the rest of us, it's screwed us. You know, it was hard to be closed, but we should have all been closed, and it would have been absolutely worth losing it all to be like, we're all closed and we're all gonna stay healthy and figure this out. Because when you actually believe in like collective work, there was no way that we would be too big to fail, as opposed to, you know, 1 or 2, 3 big groups that are the only ones that are too big to fail. We are too big to fail. But it didn't work that way. You know, we talked to people, friends and family, other business people, and they're like, well, you're still open. Yes, true. You got it. Yes, we're still open. But we're open. We're an open wound. That's the open we are. It's like, yeah, we're very excited to still be in the mix here. Very grateful, very blessed to be in the mix, but it is coming at such a cost to like our mental health, our physical health, our just existence. Like it is not free. It is not worth the dollars that have been put into the business through government funding. It's not even coming close.
Oh, well, what a place to end up. But you know, what I'm really interested in is, you know, what does 2021 have in store for us? It can't be that bad, right?
Could not end well. Behind us, on this lower level, we are up on these bleachers. This whole area has been constructed for the inauguration. We watched over the last couple months this area be built, and then now to be standing here right now, I never would have thought that would happen.
What the absolute shit was that? God. You know, I gotta say, this is a really, really awkward time to learn that police actually know how to not use deadly force. This is awkward, man. God. How do you... That can't... Okay, but there's got to be other stuff that's going on. Like, you know, that's election insanity. Like, we knew there was going to be election insanity, but we're past that. We've got like a new administration. Let's see what... Oh, wait a second. There's how many new variants? And they're how much more? Oh, God, no. Wait, they're throwing out vaccines because they can't get them to people fast enough. But we just spent the entire last year getting ready for, of course, yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, 2020, the 400th year. But it's okay. We have a new administration. Things can be taken care of. Things can be fixed. They said they're going to do a whole bunch of stuff right on the first day, and no. They're pushing for schools to be reopening? Didn't Trump, fully admit that that was mainly to just, try and force herd immunity to happen, pushing all of our schools to remain open? Yeah, that was an administration choice deciding that, herd immunity through our teachers and our children is acceptable. Yeah, fun time. So we're going to be working on reopening, and they're saying there's nothing they can do to alter the course of the virus in the next 100 days? Hello? Economists are begging for an influx of money to hit the American people so that we don't just full backflip slide into depression take 2, depression 2, it gets worse. There's so much that can be done. Gosh, I mean, you can just shut down and put tracing in place like all of the other fancy pants countries that got their virus caseload under control did. We don't have to invent the wheel. Damn. Sorry, that just... Nobody's coming to save us. Nobody is coming to save us. Where does that leave us?
When we fall, we tend to get preoccupied with the pain and hurt, and we sometimes forget to look forward about getting back up and moving on.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe I hope that if there's any light that comes out of this, any good, it's that this should be the catalyst for change. Because if this is not the wave could fall, what is?
Right. I think we'll be much more intentional with how we spend our time and who we spend our time with. And physical touch, I think we'll all be very conscious about when and how that happens and respecting people's boundaries a little bit better, which is actually something that I'm looking forward to. I think that I've actually become more... I check in on my people more frequently than I would in an ordinary year, in a non-plague year, in a non-civil rights movement year, if that's ever a thing. So I've been checking in with people a lot. I've noticed that, like everyone, probably my emotions are a little more up and down. So I try to check in with myself before reaching out. It's helped my communication skills because I'm being very intentional with who and how I communicate on a daily basis.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's cool to see folks just finding new ways to carve out their community spaces. So having the time to really connect to folks and seeing people also experiencing the same thing and trying to move away from it has been life-saving, has been grounding for sure.
I try to listen to my body. If my body says time to rest, I lay down. If my body says we can keep going, I keep going. The home used to be like a place that you don't do stuff in. It's shifted from that to a place I actually live and work in.
That's lovely.
My room feels more homey.
It's been very inspiring. So just really what it's been is a global collaboration. At the end of the day, we are all in this together. No matter where you live on this earth, we're in it. We're all in it. So this is a shared experience that we are all having.
It is.
I think the essential workers right now are some of the most, the truest heroes because some of them are risking their own lives to keep the shelves stocked and to keep the medical supplies coming in.
Yeah.
I hope that folks who see this I am hoping to connect to you in that what has happened, not just last year, but how far along you've come and how it is possible to shift, to transmute your talent and your power into the spaces that you really, 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 really want to be in. This is a good time for letting go of a lot in order to make room for those handful of things we really cherish. So I hope anyone who is feeling connected to this, there's something that in what I'm saying is sparked in them to want to make a move toward a very vulnerable move toward those passions. We talk a lot about like your passion doesn't have to be your work and hobbies and what, and turning your hobbies into money and we just need to like fuck right off with all that shit and just be. It's for everyone, but especially for people of color, especially for non-binary, non-conforming folks, especially for neurodivergent folks, especially for folks with lack of access and folks with disabilities, who are just not the standard. Like, it feels even more pertinent now to release the requirement of performing according to the expectations of what we consider to be standard. It feels very important to start preserving ourselves. So do what you gotta do to do that. Like,
we've got to be here for each other, no matter what. As Kaish Davenport put it so beautifully. There is no magic bullet. There is no absolute right answer. There is no quick fix. And this, sadly, isn't something that I think, or, evidence around us shows that's going to be fixed by a figurehead. It's just not. What we have is each other. And that feels like real crap in a pandemic that keeps you away from your loved ones and afraid of being in the same room with each other. But there's so many ways that we can connect with each other. There are so many forms of communication that have popped up, even in response to the pandemic. Something that I talked about with Christina Cole about is that the time after pandemics has been noted in history as a time for great changes towards equitable standards of living and healthier, safer ways of coexisting. So, in the end, it's this. It's community. It's hearing each other. It's listening. At the end of the day, at the end of a very long day, I think this is going to be what we make of it. All right. You there, James? Can I?
I am. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can.
Hello. So I am here. We are back, of course, with your wonderful host and the creative force behind that incredible experience we all just shared, the 3 C's, New Queer Power. And once again, I'm James Monroe. I'm the producer of adult programs at the Museum of Science Boston, and I'm thrilled to be here with New Queer tonight for a Q&A. We're going to answer a bunch of your questions that you're sending in. Before we dive in, though, I just want to thank you, New Queer, for sharing this experience with us, for allowing us at the museum to be a part of it and to kick off our season with this wonderful show. And a major thank you to our 4 special guests as well who shared their stories. We wish that
thank you
could all be
Kaisha Davenport.
here.
Thank you, Christina Cole of Open Source Medical Supplies. Thank you, Luminous Pariah. Thank you, Emmy Great. Thank all of you so much.
Yes, we wish you were all here and we could have shared that experience together, but we feel your energy here tonight in the studio. And just thank you for sharing your stories. We are going to jump in because there's a lot of love coming in for all of you, and a lot of questions for you, New Queer. So if you have questions still, you can submit those by going to the link that's scrolling at the top of your screen at slido.com. slido.com, and you can enter the code the 3Cs just as it appears on your screen. So the first question is one that we got a lot, and it's sort of asking about the process of how this all came together. There's a lot of moving parts, it seems, and a lot of people involved. How did you make this happen during the pandemic?
Well, for one, that's a great question. One that I think I spent a lot of time wrestling with because the answer was always changing. So to take the words of, and to use the words of Emmy Great, for me, stressful. But a lot of it came from first processing. It started out as just me processing in my bedroom, as I think a lot of us spent our time, especially at the beginning with the first really, like in the U.S., the first really hard shutdown, and I just really couldn't process the amount of things that were happening, and I was trying to figure out what really felt challenged. You know, I like to try and figure out where the pain points are, and really trying to understand what is negatively impacting people, where we're feeling that like pressure building up. And the words that I kept coming back to was connection and communication. It just turned into this kind of like math equation of, you know, you take connection, which is what we humans thrive on. You take communication, which is how we connect with each other. And then you divide that with COVID-19 and, ugh. So then in more practical terms of how this came together, like things have been constantly changing. Even, you know, James and the team here, us working together, has largely happened with, you know, remote meetings and then eventually culminating in being in the same building together, which took a lot of figuring, and the Museum of Science has incredibly strict guidelines around safety for like even being able to enter the building. So really just keeping up with the constant changing parameters, in the end sort of steered and defined how the show was able to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we have been talking for I think almost 2 years about collaborating on a project, and we started off with something that was equally as awesome but very different,
wildly different.
Would take place, you know, in person in the planetarium, which we will do one day, and it's just been such a journey, but really incredible to watch you as an artist sort of pivot with the times and the restrictions as they've changed. I mean, even throughout the past couple of months, like we didn't know if we were going to be able to have you in studio. So just for everyone out there watching, New Queer and I are both at the Museum of Science in our studio spaces, but we are in 2 completely separate rooms that are fully enclosed. We are by ourselves, literally speaking to cameras. And then our wonderful AV, small AV team of 2 people are in a separate AV control room, socially distanced, wearing masks, again, in their own spaces. So we're all completely socially distanced, and that's how New Queer and I can be without our masks tonight. So setting all of that protocol on top of the normal stress of just developing a new piece. I commend you as an artist for just how patient and sort of with the flow you went. On that note, because it seems like you conducted a lot of all those interviews remotely, people have some questions about the tech and sort of what tech resources that you all use to connect for interviews and to put the show together. Are there any specific websites or tools or apps that you can recommend to fellow creatives who may be itching to produce right now?
Yeah. Well, the technical side of things is that I am arguably mildly insane. And what that means is that like I approach things from this like technical end where it's like, are you really going to record yourself separately on a camera that you know is the best quality camera that you have, but it doesn't have a good microphone on it, so you're going to record your audio separately onto your phone. And so for getting audio to sound like good quality for videos, something that's very easy to do is you can find lav mics. You see this a lot with like TikTok videos and different like YouTubers. But if you can actually find very affordable lav mics. The one that I was using is, I think like, there was one I tried at first that was $20. It did not work out, sadly. And so it's $40, which on the scale of affordability, you know, it's not free, sadly. But as far as a microphone that you'll be able to immediately plug into, you can find ones that will plug into your phone as well as a camera. So it has the ability to be cross-functional. That will make it a lot easier to get clear audio. And then for doing the interviewing of people remotely, I basically had, we had a device, for me it was my laptop, that was running Zoom. I had headphones in that was conducting that Zoom conversation so that you wouldn't hear the person I was talking to, that wouldn't get picked up by my microphone. And then they sent me their video, usually like video and audio, thankfully chunked together for my sanity. I only had to deal with that from one difficult performer, myself. So getting that sent over, you know, had to get them into chunks small enough to work with the internet capacity of both being able to upload it and download it. So figuring out ways to get things chunked in place. I think as far as creatives that are looking for free tools, one of the best free tools in the audio industry is Audacity, and it continues to be. It was the best like free tool in sound like engineering land back when I was in like college, and it still is. It stays as the standard. It is the standard if you look up for like, how do you remove noise? Since that's a really big thing that people deal with, is noise in their environment, because microphones are very, very, very sensitive. And that, you can just do it in Audacity. You don't have to have a fancy, very expensive program. And also, you know, take advantage of those free periods to create content that's impressive looking and get it in front of people who will pay you. That's like one of the tools that I used at points where I really have not had access, is like find out, go on forums. There's lots of people who have a lot more in their brain because of not talking for an hour, who will have great advice on different free tools and also tools that give you a free period that you can take advantage of.
Great. Really helpful. I know that, you know, it's difficult to get going, and I've heard that from a lot of creatives during this time. It sort of, the hardest part has just been sort of wrapping your head around how you even get started. So that advice is, I'm sure, really, really
well, you know, specifically, very, very briefly, but specifically to that, I think of the advice that I got when I was asking friends for how to start a skincare routine, because I did not have one. I did not know what to do with my skin. I was, you know, young, foolish, with like 12 layers of skin regenerating a day. So I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, friends, what do I do? And they're like, oh, well, you know, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And I'm like, I am overwhelmed. I'm just gonna go back to ignoring my skin. Goodbye. And then I met someone who was like, pick one thing.
Yeah. Pick
one thing, get good at it, and then add on something else. So if you feel, especially if you're a performer who hasn't gone into the virtual realm yet and you feel really overwhelmed by it, start with one step. Don't go for the crazy fireworks right out the bat. It's a beautiful idea and you'll get there, but start with something smaller.
I love that advice. So we have a great comment here and a question. I appreciated the range here between levity and the somber reality we've all had all year and for most of all of our lives. What are your thoughts around attainable, lasting self-care? We cannot solve for injustice on an individual basis, but in the day-to-day, what are your suggestions or thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, to be like personal about it, one of the biggest things that this pandemic, this experience has really challenged me to do is to have an actual, like, really solid concept of how I feel doing things. And now, like, I've been a friend that friends have told me, wow, your boundaries are fantastic. And I do have a really great concept of my boundaries and how to lay them. But I also spent probably the most of my life just kind of telling myself that I could cope through things. And when everything stops, this was something that Kaisha Davenport of Tanam and I spent some time talking about. Shadow work, baby. Like, it is some nasty, unpleasant, uplifting work. Really feeling how you feel is, I think, a very important first step, because now speaking to specifically people of my skin tone, there's a lot of shame that we have built in us that is activated by different things in our environment. And that shame is judgmental. It could be judgmental of people in our environment, or it could be judgmental of ourselves. And the thing is that if you want to show up and start being part of being a better neighbor, being a better part of your community, part of that work is finding where your different shame internal spots are. And you can absolutely sit there going, oh, well, I know myself. But the thing is that it will keep coming up. I remember at a point where I was fiercely feminist. I have been in my fiercely feminist stage for a long time, and I still am a fiercely feminist, so whatever. But I had come to these concepts, and I'd looked at, like, oh yeah, showing skin doesn't make you less intelligent. I take off my clothes all the time, and oh well, having someone be under the influence of something not sober, that doesn't make them a bad person. Like, I understand these things. And then I caught myself one day at a party being just really judgmental when I found out that someone who I'd seen inebriated and without much clothes on was an educator. And I just had this flash of, like, judgmental, like, oh, really? And in that moment, I just had to hold on to that part of myself and go, you're here. I thought I worked on you. Wait, I did work on you, but you're here. So these things that we've been raised in, this history that goes back 100 years, 200, 1,000, it's not something that is just going to go away. It's built into our society, and even when you work on it, the way that our cultures and communities are set up, it will reinforce it. It'll bring it back up again. So a great place to start is by really getting to understand yourself so that you can show up as your best self and not make snap judgments and not, immediately assume something just because someone is wearing, say, a ratty jacket. I'm losing all of myself, but it's okay.
No, that's great. And thank you for that. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. I feel like that's the next program.
There was so much that got left on the cutting room floor. It was
that was
so
a question.
hard.
That was a question. Yes, that's perfect segue. We can plan that, I promise.
Yeah.
Give me, like, one example of part of the story or an interview that just had to get left on the cutting room floor for space, but was really valuable or interesting that maybe we as viewers tonight weren't able to see or hear.
Yeah. I honestly, there was an example. There were plentiful examples for each person, and as the person who is making the decisions, I have to balance and really try to help a cohesive message come forward. And so things get left on the cutting room floor. One of the things that really sucked to leave out is that part of the conversation that I had with Luminous Pariah, we went over how at the beginning of the pandemic, he was actually working as an Uber driver. And his day job outside of the theatrical, profession that he has is actually working as an essential worker in a grocery store. It's a natural food store. And thankfully, he told me that part of the interview, he is being treated wonderfully and getting tons of support. But, and then Kaisha Davenport, we talked about shadow work. And one of the areas of shadow work that we touched on that resonated really deeply for me when we were in this dialogue is that, she experienced some death in 2020 that had nothing to do with COVID. And there is just a special kind of horrible feeling that I remember in my own experience of having some personal life death happen, where you just end up sitting there going, that's not allowed. Like, no, this is a pandemic year, which means the only reason why anyone is going to die is from COVID. Obviously, that's the only way that we could psychologically survive this time period. It's not allowed. Emmy and I spent some time talking about music because Emmy Great really reconnected with music over the lockdown period. And that's something that I really hope a lot of other people experience as well. It's definitely something that mirrored in my experience, spending the first few months just playing music every chance that I could as a coping mechanism. Because healthy coping mechanisms, man, find them. And
so it sounds like there's enough for maybe a part 2 or 3.
Absolutely.
And I actually love this question. Speaking on the future, thinking far ahead.
Yes.
We are in a post-COVID world. Would you ever consider staging this as a live in-person experience and sort of looking back and reflecting sort of, this is a reflection of it's a year in, we're in the thick of it still, sort of looking back once we're sort of out of this situation. Would you ever consider sort of doing this as a live show?
Yeah, absolutely.
And who were some guests that maybe you would love to interview or have voices? That was another question as well.
Oh, goodness. I know exactly who, because when you're making art, when you're working on something with a group of people in a pandemic, one of the things that I accepted walking into it was we're going to roll with the punches. There are going to be changes, and that's just how it's going to be. And one of those is that I was originally the first person that I talked with was Didi Delgado of Done for Didi, based in Boston and New York. And Didi is a fantastic person that I really, really was so looking forward to inviting into this conversation because of her experience as a community organizer, as someone who is fundraising reparations for Black women and non-men and marginalized genders. The work that she does is absolutely fantastic. Let's see. And similarly, I really wanted to connect with Brandy Chambray, who is a musician around Boston, who has actually been on this program before, I believe, in connection with Booba. And really, there's just so many people. I have a list at home, and I had to narrow myself down and make really intentional decisions to try and show as many varied perspectives as possible. But I honestly, the part of me that feels bad, it doesn't really feel bad, but if I had infinite time, I wish that there was more time for essential workers, especially medical professionals, for COVID long haulers, because that is a story that is still unfolding, that we still don't understand how many people it's going to affect, how badly it's going to impact people. Yeah, I mean, the answer is that there's so many people that I would love to connect with. And I think this is a kind of conversation that just can continue. We can keep learning from this.
Totally. I mean, that's what's so beautiful about it is tonight we got to experience other people's experiences and feel connection through the human experience, which I think is everlasting, right? So this was a very specific time to reflect and to do that in, but I think I see a very wide future and a successful future for this program and hopefully what will become a series. And I think we as an audience have so much to look forward to. And I think that's a perfect way to cap the night. New Queer Power, you continue to be one of my favorite creators and producers in the city. We've known each other for so long.
Really
I'm so happy that we finally were able to have you here and to amplify and support your work. Any final words from you for our audience?
I thank you so much for inviting me to this experience working with the Museum of Science folks, and also thank the folks who talked with me. You should absolutely go and follow them and support them in every way that you possibly can. Get over to Tanam, get you some delicious food, and also thank you folks who showed up, who really brought your presence to this, because this is I know it's so corny sounding, but it is something that we have to do together. It's a collaboration. If this was just me talking to myself, well, but this is what we are doing together. And so I really, really do appreciate, especially with just how difficult these topics are. Thank you so much for making time and space and being here with us tonight.
Yes, and thank you again. Thank you to everyone involved. Thank you to all of you out there watching, as New Queer said, and for spending your Wednesday night with us. And once again, thank you to Barbara and Malcolm L. Sherman for making tonight possible for all of us to be here and to be here for free. We hope that you will continue to check out the rest of our winter spring lineup and keep coming back and joining us. And until then, stay well, stay healthy, and have a great night.